Imagine spending 6 straight hours fixing someone's expensive industrial machine, only for the owner to stroll in smirking and say, "Yeah, we're not paying you. Big mistake. Because I'm an engineer, and engineers don't get even. We get precise." If you've ever been underpaid, disrespected, or treated like your skills don't matter, this story is going to feel like pure therapy. So hit that like button, subscribe, and get ready, because today's revenge isn't loud, it isn't violent. It's smart, clean, and absolutely devastating. I've always been one of those people who finds peace in logic. Where others feel overwhelmed by wires, circuits, or thick technical manuals, I feel calm. It's like the world makes more sense when there are rules, systems, and mechanisms that behave exactly the way you expect, unless someone messes with them. That's why engineering felt less like a career and more like a natural extension of my mind. For years, I worked for a specialized manufacturing equipment company, the type that designs machines no average person ever sees, but every major production facility relies on. Machines with hundreds of components, dozens of internal subsystems, and installation manuals thick enough to choke a horse. Most people found these machines intimidating. I found them beautiful. I learned every bolt, every calibration step, every hidden menu buried 3 layers into the software. I could install these units blindfolded, and honestly, sometimes it felt like I did. And because I was good at what I did, clients remembered me, not the company. That wasn't supposed to happen. But when you solve million-pound production problems in a matter of hours, word spreads. One of those clients was a guy we'll call Jake. At first, he was just another name on his service sheet. But over time, I got to know him well enough to understand his pattern. Always stressed, always rushing, always acting like the world owed him something. But he paid on time back then and treated me mostly respectfully, so I didn't think much of it. Life moved on. Eventually, I left the company for a better job, better pay, saner hours, more stable clients. I thought I'd left people like Jake behind. I was wrong. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon. One of those rare days when work is steady. The phone is silent and you get a moment to breathe. I was sipping lukewarm coffee, scrolling through some repair logs, when my personal phone started buzzing with an unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. But curiosity got the better of me, and I picked up. "Hello?" The voice on the other end instantly triggered a faint sense of annoyance mixed with recognition. "Mate, it's Jake." I sat up a little straighter. Why was he calling me? I kept my tone polite. "Hey, everything all right?" "Oh yeah, look, we need a new unit installed. One of the big ones. And another unit's down, so we need maintenance on that too. You available this weekend?" Weekend? That was already a red flag. Companies don't book weekend installs unless they're desperate, something very expensive is broken, or they want to avoid paying overtime. I answered honestly, "I don't work there anymore, Jake. I moved on months ago. But I can connect you to someone." He cut me off quickly. No, mate, the company's charging insane rates now. Like, stupidly high. We can't justify it. We've got the instructions they sent, but our engineers can't make sense of them. The thing's a nightmare. I knew exactly what instructions he was talking about. Our company offered 2 installation choices. Option A, Pay for a professional engineer to come in. Option B. Save money by installing it yourself using a manual that looked like it had been written by a sleep-deprived robot with a grudge. And here's the kicker. Company policy. If a client touches the machine before the engineer arrives, we are not allowed to help. Too many clients broke expensive parts and tried to blame us afterward. Jake kept talking, pulling every manipulation trick in his book. Look, we'll pay you double your current rate. Just please come down this weekend and set it up for us. Double my rate? That was tempting. But more importantly, I knew how difficult the installation was without experience. If their engineers were already confused, it meant the machine was half-assembled, poorly assembled, or incorrectly assembled. Most likely all three. I paused. Jake sensed the hesitation and went in for the kill. Please, man. We're dead in the water. You're the only one who knows these things inside out. And that part was true. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Because at that moment, I still believed Jake was the same guy I'd worked with years ago. I still believed he was fair, reasonable, not the kind of person who would stab you in the back with a smile. But some people only act decent when they need something from you. I was about to learn that the hard way. The following Saturday, I drove to their facility. An ugly, steel-clad building on the edge of an industrial estate, surrounded by cracked concrete and the smell of diesel fumes. When I walked inside, the atmosphere was instantly familiar. The buzzing fluorescent lights, the hum of machines, the echo of footsteps on metal walkways, the faint smell of lubricants and burnt wiring. They showed me where the new unit was, still in boxes. I rolled up my sleeves, opened my toolkit, and got to work. For 6 hours straight, I lifted heavy electrical modules, aligned calibration sensors, connected control systems, arranged circuitry, configured internal software settings, practically rebuilt the heart of their production line. I barely spoke to anyone. Their engineers moved around the room like confused ducks, whispering among themselves, throwing occasional glances at me like I was some kind of wizard performing forbidden magic. But I didn't mind. This was normal. This was work. And I was nearly done. Just a couple more finishing steps, and the unit would have been ready for final calibration. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, heavy, deliberate. "Hey, mate," Jake said casually. I turned around, wiping sweat from my forehead. "Almost done. Give me another 30 minutes," and he held up his hand. And for the first time, I noticed his expression. No urgency. No gratitude. Just a rehearsed, slimy smirk. "Yeah, about that." My stomach tightened. "We, don't actually have the budget to pay you," he said, as if announcing the weather. I blinked. "What?" He shrugged like it wasn't a big deal. "Yeah, sorry. The numbers don't check out. We thought we could make it work, but we can't. But hey, our engineers can take it from here." He actually patted me on the shoulder, like he was doing me a favor. 6 hours of labor. A weekend ruined. Sweat dripping into my eyes. My back sore. Knees aching. And he just dismissed me. Something hot and electric shot through my chest. Not anger. Not yet. It was disbelief. The kind that freezes you, like your brain refuses to accept the insult. I took a breath. "So you called me here knowing you couldn't pay?" "No, no," he said, waving his hands. "We plan to, but budgets are tight. You know how it is." He spoke like a man inconvenienced by my existence, like I should apologize to him. At that moment, I saw him clearly for the first time. Not a stressed business owner, not a former client, just a manipulator. Someone who thought engineers were tools, disposable, replaceable, people to be used until no longer convenient. And he wasn't even smart about it. He assumed I'd leave quietly. He assumed he'd gotten free labor from me. He assumed wrong. Because here's something he didn't know. Inside every unit, in a tiny recessed corner of the internal panel, there's a little button. A harmless button. One that puts the entire machine into test mode. You can't configure a unit in test mode. You can't run it. You can't calibrate it. You can't use it for production. And the instructions never mention it. Because clients were never supposed to touch it. And engineers? We only used it during diagnostics. It requires a pin, a thin, sharp one, to press. That button was about to become my scalpel. My revenge was going to be surgical. I kept my expression calm, neutral, professional. "All right," I said softly. "If that's how it is." Jake seemed relieved that I wasn't arguing. He didn't realize the storm quietly forming behind my eyes. I turned back to the machine, pretending to finish cleaning up. Then I reached into my tool pouch, pulled out a thin calibration pin, and, click, pressed the button. Just like that, the machine was effectively a very expensive, extremely heavy, beautifully wired paperweight. I packed my tools, nodded politely, and walked out without looking back. No yelling, no confrontation, no threats. Just silence, the kind that terrifies men like him. The kind that says, "I know something you don't." Monday morning arrived with a delicious sense of anticipation. I sat at my desk, sipping my coffee, waiting. I didn't have to wait long. My phone buzzed once, then again. 3 missed calls from Jake in the span of 5 minutes. I didn't answer. I wanted him to sit with the growing panic. I wanted him to watch his production line sit dead because he decided my labor wasn't worth paying for. By noon, he had called 9 times. I turned my phone on silent and continued my day as if the world was perfectly peaceful. Meanwhile, on his end, I knew chaos was unfolding. A brand new machine, a massive investment, completely useless. His engineers probably tore apart the manual, rechecked every cable, reconfigured every setting, but nothing would work. Because that tiny button, not even mentioned in the manual, was sabotaging everything without leaving a trace. By Tuesday morning, I had 27 missed calls and 7 voicemails. The first few messages were impatient. "Mate, call me back. We need this sorted." The later ones revealed cracks in his confidence. "Look, this is urgent. We can't get the machine running." And finally, the ones left after 5 p.m. sounded like pure frustration wrapped in fear. "What did you do? Why isn't it working? Call me back. This isn't funny." I didn't respond. And every hour I ignored him, the problem dug deeper. Production delays, idle staff, money bleeding from the company every second that machine stayed frozen in test mode. By Wednesday morning, when my phone rang again, I finally answered. I knew exactly what tone he would use before I even lifted the phone. Anger mixed with the desperation of a man who realizes he has zero control. "Where the hell have you been?" he shouted. I leaned back in my chair and let him steam. "Busy," I replied calmly. "Like I told you, I don't work for your company anymore." That one sentence made him pause. I could almost hear him swallow his pride. Then came the predictable shift, the bargaining phase. "Look, we can't figure it out. The machine won't configure. Our engineers are stuck. We need your help. Just tell me what's wrong." His voice trembled slightly, a sound I savored. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult him. I simply said the truth in a tone as cold as polished steel. "Why is this my problem? You refuse to pay me." Silence. The type that punches through the phone line. Then, finally, a quiet, strained sentence. "Okay. I'm sorry. We'll work something out. Please, just come in." There it was, admission. But sorry wasn't good enough. Not after dragging me out on a weekend. Not after using my skills, my time, my sweat, and tossing me aside like a disposable tool. So I took a breath and delivered the line that shifted all power to me. "No, you're going to pay me £7,000 up front before I do anything," he exploded. Screaming, ranting, threatening. 7,000? Are you insane? I waited until he was done. "Jake," I said, "you can either sit there losing tens of thousands every day, or you can pay for someone who actually knows what they're doing." He hung up. I expected that. I also expected the call that came 24 hours later. This time, Jake didn't yell. He didn't argue. His voice sounded broken, exhausted, humiliated. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I shouldn't have acted like that. If you fix it, we'll pay you." The shift was complete. The man who once treated me like a disposable tool was now treating me like the only lifeline he had left. But I wasn't done setting boundaries. "Up front," I repeated. "Payment first. Then I'll fix it." There was a long, painful pause. "Fine," he whispered, defeated. And just like that, I received a bank notification. £7,000. Instantly cleared. When I arrived the next morning, the atmosphere inside the factory was completely different. The usual thrum of machinery was gone. The air felt tense, thick with stress. Workers stood around waiting, unable to do their jobs without the unit running. As I walked in, every eye followed me, not with respect, but with the desperate hope of people who needed production to start again. Jake's face was a mess of frustration, shame, and forced politeness. He waved me toward the machine like a man leading a surgeon to an operating table, too terrified to speak. I didn't drag it out. I walked straight to the internal panel, slid off the protective cover, reached inside with a calibration pin, and pressed the tiny recessed button. Click. The machine immediately snapped out of test mode and into full configuration readiness. Every engineer in the room froze. Jake looked at me with wide, disbelieving eyes. "That's it," he whispered. His voice cracked. I didn't answer. I navigated the final software steps, completed the configuration, and watched the machine boot into operational mode. The whole room exhaled at once. Jake looked like someone had just pulled his soul out and handed it back to him in a plastic bag. He opened his mouth to speak, probably to ask me what I'd done, or how he could have fixed it. or how something so small could have caused so much chaos. But I cut him off. "We're done here." I packed my tools, zipped my bag, and walked toward the exit without looking back. 20 minutes of work, £7,000 already in my account, and the priceless sight of Jake, realizing just how badly he had underestimated the one person who could save him. As I stepped outside, I felt it not just satisfaction, but justice. Engineers don't look for fights. We solve problems. But if someone creates a problem by disrespecting us, we solve that too, and in the most precise way possible. As I walked out of the factory that morning, the cold air hit my face, but inside I felt warm, heated by a sense of justice that wasn't loud or vengeful, but deeply earned. I sat in my car for a moment, watching workers through the glass, windows scrambling to get production moving again, now that the machine roared back to life. It amazed me how a single hidden button smaller than a grain of corn held an entire company hostage. And it amazed me even more how someone could treat the person who knew about that button like he was disposable. That's the thing people like Jake never understood. You don't disrespect the people who hold your world together. Not the engineers, not the specialists, not the technicians who know where the skeletons are hidden in your systems. Driving away felt symbolic, like I was leaving behind not just a job, but the version of myself that tolerated being undervalued. For years, I'd been the type of person who worked extra hours without complaint, who tolerated rude clients because professionalism demanded it, who put in more effort than the paycheck reflected. But when Jake tried to play me, tried to use me, and toss me aside, I felt something in me shift. Engineers aren't confrontational by nature, but we understand precision, cause and effect, and the quiet ways systems respond when one piece is mishandled. On the drive home, my phone buzzed again, not Jake, but one of the younger engineers from his team. He'd somehow saved my number from years ago. His message was short. "What did you do?" "The machine just started working after you left." I smiled but didn't reply. I wasn't obligated to teach them the secrets that took years of field experience to learn. If Jake had respected me, maybe I would have offered advice. Maybe I would have explained the importance of that tiny recessed button. But respect is currency, and Jake had spent his poorly. Later that evening, as I sat eating dinner, I thought about how many times workers in all industries get walked over simply because someone in a higher position believes their time is cheap. I remembered nights spent crawling on concrete floors fixing wiring, days spent troubleshooting in suffocating heat, hands covered in grease, sweat dripping onto circuit boards. I remembered how often clients expected miracles, yet acted offended when they had to pay for expertise. Jake wasn't unique, just louder, bolder, and more shameless than most. The next morning, I received one last message from him. It wasn't angry. It wasn't demanding. It was 2 words. "Thank you." That hit me harder than any insult he'd thrown in the past week. Not because I needed his gratitude, far from it, but because it confirmed exactly who he was. A man who only respected others when desperation forced him to. A man who would never say thank you unless backed into a corner. A man who learned nothing except fear of consequences. In the days that followed, that sense of empowerment stayed with me. I didn't brag about what happened. I didn't tell coworkers or friends. This wasn't the kind of revenge you shout about. This was silent justice, the kind you feel deep in your bones, the kind that reminds you your skills have value, real value, enough value that someone like Jake would rather pay £7,000 than admit he misjudged you. Weeks passed. My workload returned to normal. Then one afternoon, while grabbing a coffee, I overheard two colleagues joking about how clients always underestimate the complexity of technical jobs. I smiled quietly to myself, resisting the urge to share my story. Some victories are best kept personal, not because they're small, but because they reflect a shift inside you more than they reflect what you did to someone else. It wasn't until a month later that I ran into someone who worked at Jake's factory. I spotted him at a supply store, browsing electrical connectors. He recognized me instantly and approached with a nervous laugh. "You're the guy who fixed that machine, right?" he said, rubbing the back of his neck. Jake was losing his mind. We tore that thing apart for 3 days. Even called the supplier, but they refused to help because we touched the equipment. You wouldn't believe the chaos. Oh, I could believe it. In fact, I'd counted on it. He lowered his voice. I've been trying to figure out what was wrong, but he wouldn't tell us. Just said he paid a consultant who fixed it instantly. What did you do? His tone was half curiosity, half admiration. I shrugged. Just experience, I said. And that was the truth. Experience tells you where the shortcuts are hidden, where the vulnerabilities lie, which buttons matter and which ones are traps. Experience teaches you how to navigate not just machines, but people. After that encounter, I realized something important. I hadn't just taken revenge on Jake. I had taught him a lesson he'd never forget: that expertise isn't free, respect isn't optional, and treating people fairly isn't some luxury you can abandon when budgets tighten. And judging by the way the engineers at his facility still whispered about the week the machine refused to function, I'd become something of a legend among them. Not for sabotaging the machine, but for reminding their arrogant boss that you don't mess with people who know more than you. And I'll be honest, that felt good. Really good. That moment of standing in Jake's warehouse, him watching helplessly as I fixed everything with a single click, that wasn't just revenge. It was reclaiming years of swallowed frustrations, underappreciation, and moments where I'd held back instead of standing up for my worth. And walking away afterward, with my tools over my shoulder and £7,000 already in my account, I felt lighter than I had in a long time. In the quiet that followed, I realized something even more profound. Engineers might not always get loud victories, but we get smart ones, clean ones, efficient ones. And if someone pushes us too far, we don't break, we recalibrate. We adjust. And I was more than ready to strike where it hurt the most. The annual community meeting hall was usually half empty, but that evening it was overflowing. People sensed tension in the air, whispers, folded arms, side eyes aimed at the board members. The HOA president sat confidently at the front, wearing that same smug smile he always had when he believed he had total control. He started the meeting with the usual scripted nonsense about community unity and strict enforcement for the greater good, but his confidence began to crack the moment I raised my hand. "I have something to present," I said calmly, walking toward the front with my folder. The room fell silent. Every board member shifted uncomfortably. I laid out neatly organized documents, emails showing the president using OA rules to target specific residents he didn't like, financial records proving the treasurer used community funds for personal purchases, and testimonies from neighbors complaining about harassment and unfair treatment. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse blindly. I read facts line by line, date by date, violation by violation. And the longer I spoke, the more people turned against the board. Neighbors who had been silent for years suddenly began standing up, sharing their experiences, exposing discrimination, favoritism, and manipulation. The president tried to interrupt me, but every time he opened his mouth, someone else from the crowd shut him down. The treasurer looked pale, sweating, unable to justify a single number on the spreadsheets I displayed. And then came the final blow. I pulled out printed copies of a complaint letter drafted by multiple residents demanding immediate vote for the board's removal. All signatures were real, collected over the last 48 hours while the HOA thought I was hiding. The room erupted not in chaos, but in unity. People demanded accountability, demanded change, demanded resignations. Cornered, humiliated, and exposed, the board members had no choice. One by one, they stepped down. The president tried to save himself with excuses, but nobody listened. By the end of the night, the same HOA that once tried to control everything was dismantled from within by their own lies, and the community they underestimated. And as I walked out of that hall, the same people who once watched from a distance now shook my hand, thanked me, and finally felt free. My silence hadn't been surrender, it had been preparation. And revenge, done legally and intelligently, had never felt more satisfying. In the weeks following the HOA board's collapse, the neighborhood felt almost unrecognizable in the best way possible. People who used to avoid eye contact now greeted each other with genuine smiles. Kids played outside without being scolded for noise violations. Elderly neighbors who once lived in fear of petty fines finally relaxed on their porches again. And for the first time in years, the community felt like an actual community. But the aftermath wasn't just peaceful, it was revealing. The moment new temporary leadership took over, the real scope of the old board's corruption surfaced. Files were missing, funds unaccounted for, and dozens of fabricated citations had been issued solely to intimidate residents. The treasurer's misuse of money turned out to be even larger than I suspected, close to thousands, over several months. As investigations began and reports were filed, a quiet satisfaction settled in, not the kind fueled by anger, but the kind that comes from knowing justice had finally landed where it belonged. The former president tried to subtly reach out to a few neighbors, attempting to twist the narrative and claim he was a victim of exaggeration, but no one believed him anymore. He had spent years ruling with intimidation, and now he couldn't convince a single person of his innocence. What truly surprised me, though, was how many people came to thank me personally. Some brought cookies, others wrote simple notes, and a few just walked over to shake my hand. It wasn't the praise I cared about. It was the fact that people finally had the courage to speak. A neighbor who had lived there for 15 years confessed that she'd always wanted to fight back, but never felt she could do it alone. Another admitted he had been fined so many times he considered moving away. Hearing their stories reminded me why standing up had mattered so much, not just for me, but for everyone who had been quietly suffering. And as the community started rebuilding trust and rewriting fair rules, the temporary committee offered me a position on the new board. I didn't accept it, not because I didn't care, but because I had done what I needed to do. I didn't want power. I just wanted fairness. Instead, I suggested a group of residents who genuinely cared about the neighborhood and understood what tyranny looked like. For the first time in years, the HOA began operating the way it was supposed to: transparent, respectful, and actually helpful. And on a calm evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset stretch across the street, I realized something important. Sometimes revenge isn't loud, messy, or destructive. Sometimes it's simply the act of exposing the truth, empowering the right people, and letting justice unfold naturally. And in this case, justice didn't just settle the score, it restored an entire community. But the story didn't end there, because every victory, no matter how satisfying always, leaves behind echoes that take time to settle. A month after the new HO leadership took over, I received an unexpected letter in my mailbox. Not handwritten, not friendly official. A formal legal notice from the former HOA president's attorney accusing me of instigating unrest, defamation, and damaging his reputation. For a moment, my stomach tightened and old frustration threatened to rise again. But instead of panic, a strange calm washed over me. He wasn't fighting for justice. He was fighting for control, something he had already lost. I didn't respond immediately. I took the letter inside, sat at my table, and read it 5 times, analyzing every word. His claims were weak, desperate, and laughably easy to dismantle. Worse for him, I had every piece of evidence neatly organized. Emails he sent threatening residents, recorded meetings where he openly abused his authority, screenshots of false violations, and even testimonies from neighbors who had been bullied for years. When I handed everything over to an attorney friend who reviewed the documents pro bono out of pure enthusiasm, he chuckled and said the former president had absolutely no case. Still, the pettiness of his move reignited the community's anger. Once they heard what he attempted, dozens of residents volunteered statements against him. The new board even issued a public notice, supporting me and condemning any attempt to intimidate someone who exposed wrongdoing. Ultimately, the former president's lawyer went silent. The threat evaporated, and his final attempt at revenge backfired humiliatingly. With nowhere left to run, he quietly put his house up for sale. I remember the day the moving truck pulled up. No goodbyes, no sympathy, no supporters lingering to wave him off. Just a man who had ruled through control, now walking away in complete silence. Watching from my porch, I didn't feel triumph or cruelty. I felt closure. Real, deep, peaceful closure. Because the greatest revenge wasn't that he lost his position or his power. It was that he couldn't twist the truth anymore. He couldn't manipulate anyone. He couldn't threaten, bully, or hide behind fake rules. His reign was over, and he was leaving behind a neighborhood that had finally learned to stand up for itself. And me? I simply took a slow breath, leaned back in my chair, and let the moment wash over me. Justice, real justice, had a way of arriving late, but when it arrived, it left no room for doubt.